What if the greatest city in the world once floated on water and then disappeared? Beneath the streets of Mexico City lies a forgotten empire. Not one buried in sand or sealed in tombs, but hidden in plain sight. Stone by stone, word by word, whispered through centuries of silence. This is the story of the Aztecs, a people who carved an empire from marsh and prophecy, who believed the sun must be fed to rise, who mapped the heavens with obsidian and raised temples where blood met sky. They rose from exile, ruled with precision, and vanished in the span of a single generation. But what really caused their fall? Was it foreign steel, silent disease, or something deeper, something within? In this journey, we walk not through myths, but through the living echoes of an empire, through floating gardens still blooming, codices that survived the flame, warriors who fought for balance, not just victory, and a calendar that may have seen the end before it began. You will not watch this story. You will live it, as the one who found the mirror, who stepped into the ruins, who followed the signs the world forgot. This is the Aztec world, not as it ended, but as it endures. And the expedition begins now. They say the lake is gone now, buried beneath concrete and thunder. But if you listen closely, on certain mornings, when the city is still asleep and the fog rolls low over Mexico City, you can almost hear it again. The lapping of water against stone, the creak of canoes cutting through the reeds, the voice of a city that once rose from the depths like a dream too powerful to drown. Tenochtitlán. The name still carries weight, like the syllables of a spell. It was not supposed to be here. This was a land of swamps and salt water, a place other tribes had rejected. But the Mexica, the people who would become the Aztecs, were not given a choice. They were wanderers, exiled by legend, cursed by prophecy, searching for a home they had never seen, a home promised to them by the gods. They arrived in the Valley of Mexico tired, unwelcome, and strange. No land was offered, no peace was promised. But then came the vision, an eagle, clutching a serpent, perched atop a cactus. Not just a symbol, a sign. They found it on a small island, surrounded by the shimmering waters of Lake Texcoco. And there, in a place no one else wanted, they began to build. It must have seemed impossible, an empire built on mud and marshes, but they laid down stone. They drove wooden stakes deep into the lake bed and filled them with volcanic rock, creating the first foundations. Bit by bit, they summoned a city from water and will. Causeways stretched like arms from the island to the mainland. Canals flowed between neighborhoods like streets of liquid silver, and all around them the lake mirrored the sky, turning their reflection into myth. By the time the Spanish arrived, centuries later, Tenochtitlan rivaled the greatest cities of Europe. The conquistadors, hardened by war and conquest, stood in awe. One described it as a vision from a dream. Massive pyramids towered in the center, markets teemed with tens of thousands, palaces rose in white stone, their walls adorned with turquoise and obsidian, and everywhere water, life. But behind the splendor was something deeper, something more ancient than stone. The city itself was a living offering, built to honor the gods, built to survive, not just floods and enemies, but time itself. Every building was aligned, every temple faced the heavens with intention. This was not just architecture, it was cosmology in stone. And yet, what truly haunts me, what stays with me in the quiet hours of the expedition, is the idea that none of this was meant to be, that a people cast out by others, given no home, forged their own destiny atop an island that should have swallowed them. The Aztecs believed they were chosen, but perhaps in a way they simply chose themselves. Today, Tenochtitlán sleeps beneath the streets of Mexico City, its temples buried, its canals filled, its foundations hidden beneath glass towers and buzzing streets. But it is still there, in echoes and shadows, in the names of neighborhoods, in the Nahuatl words we still speak, in the rhythm of the people who walk its buried paths. The island may be gone, but the will that raised it, that remains. Like the eagle on the cactus, watching, waiting, reminding us that history is not made by the expected, but by those who refuse to vanish. The codex was brittle in my hands, a skin of deerskin and ink, faded but still alive with meaning. Red strokes, black outlines, jagged shapes that danced like flames across the parchment. It told no gentle story. This was not a tale of peace or harvest. It was a map of war, a chronicle of blood, a pact sealed not with pen and ink, but with sacrifice. At its center was a name that seemed to hum with power even now. Huitzilopochtli, the hummingbird of the south, the war god, the sun in its fiercest aspect. To the Aztecs, he was more than a deity. He was the force that drove the heart of the empire, the flame that demanded fuel to keep the world from falling into darkness, and the fuel was blood. The origin of the Mexica people is inseparable from him. He was their guide, their protector, their commander. It was Huitzilopochtli who led them from their mythical homeland of Aztlán. He who whispered through the priests, who pointed them to the eagle, the serpent, and the cactus. He who demanded that they conquer or perish. And they obeyed, not because they were mindless, but because they believed. To survive in a world of shifting alliances and bitter rivals, they needed something more than strength. They needed purpose. The god gave them that, and in return, they gave him everything. In the great temple, the temple mayor, Huitzilopochtli stood beside Tlaloc, the rain god. Together they represented the balance of the empire, war and water, blood and sustenance. Above the city, they towered. Below them, rivers of crimson flowed down temple steps during the great festivals. Hearts still warm, raised to the sky in offering, chests opened with obsidian blades under the eyes of thousands. To us it may seem unthinkable, but to them it was salvation. The sun, they believed, fought a daily battle across the sky. If it ever faltered, if it ever grew too weak, darkness would return. The stars would rise and the world would end. And so they gave the god what he hungered for, life for life, blood for dawn. It was not cruelty, it was continuity. Every drop spilled was a reminder that the world must be fed. And it was not just enemies who were sacrificed. Sometimes it was their own people, captives chosen with reverence, priests who walked to their deaths with pride, children offered to other gods for rain, all part of a system older than memory, older than stone. But still, I wonder, what happens to a people when their god only asks for more, when devotion is measured in lives and faith in sharpened obsidian? Was it fear that held the empire together, or was it awe? The rise of the Aztecs was not built on trade alone, not built on alliances or even strategy. It was built on the fire in their hearts, a fire stoked by Huitzilopochtli. He gave them victories, visions, empire, but he also gave them a burden, one that grew heavier with every conquest, every war, because with every enemy defeated, more sacrifices were required. With every city brought under Aztec control, more altars needed to be stained. And when there were no more enemies to fight, who would be left to keep the sun alive? The Pact had no end, only momentum. In the pages of the Codex, I saw the beginning of a spiral. Beautiful, terrifying, unstoppable. And as I turned the last page, I could almost hear it, the beating of drums beneath the temple, the chant of thousands rising to the heavens, and above them all, the burning eye of a god who was never satisfied. The reeds still rustle in the breeze, even now. Long after the canals dried and the lake bed hardened into pavement, something of the old world lingers. I stood where water once shimmered under the morning sun, where farmers moved not with plows and wheels, but by canoe and hand, and beneath my feet, the faint outline of genius. These were the Chinampas, floating gardens, the Aztecs called them, though they did not truly float. They were islands made by man, woven from reeds, staked into the shallow lake, layered with mud, sediment, and decaying vegetation until they became fertile earth, suspended on water, a quiet miracle. It was here, not in the temples or palaces, that the empire breathed. These plots fed the city. Every maize stalk, every chili, every squash, pulled from the lake itself, a landscape transformed. Where others saw marshes and ruin, the Mexica saw potential. They turned a swamp into a garden, and a garden into a system of life. The Chinampas were arranged like a lattice. Narrow walkways crisscrossed the plots, while canals flowed between them like veins. Farmers could glide by boat from plot to plot, harvesting in silence. And always the water remained close, feeding the soil, cooling the roots, holding the city afloat. I imagine the scene now. Mist rising over the lake at dawn, the slow dip of a paddle, the smell of wet earth and blooming marigolds. Not a city of stone alone, but a city of green, of rhythm, of balance. But the Chinampas were more than farms. They were philosophy. They reflected how the Aztecs saw the world as something to live with, not just rule over. Nature was not an obstacle. It was a partner. The lake gave them fish, waterfowl, and reeds. The gardens returned bounty. And so, from this harmony, rose a city unlike any other. Tenochtitlán was not built on dry land. It was raised from the water like a vision, a place where markets floated, temples reached toward the stars, and gardens lay in every direction. From above, it must have looked like a city sailing through the clouds. A dream anchored by willpower and belief. Even today, traces remain. In Xochimilco, on the southern edge of modern Mexico City, a few Chinampas still survive. There, beneath the laughter of tour boats and the flash of painted gondolas, the old ways cling to life. A few farmers still rise before dawn, still plant by the phases of the moon. Their voices echo across the water, ancient and unchanged. Standing there, watching lilies drift beside the boats, I realized something. The greatness of the Aztecs was not in their conquest alone. It was in their capacity to imagine something better and then build it. Not just pyramids and plazas, but food, sustainability. They understood what many have forgotten, that civilization is not made by cities alone, but by how those cities feed themselves, how they endure, how they root into the land even if that land is water. And perhaps that is the lesson still buried beneath the surface, that the true foundations of empire are not stone or steel, but nourishment, resilience, harmony. In the end, it was not just their temples that touched the sky, it was their gardens. Suspended between water and sun, they fed a people, they shaped a world, and they whispered something we still need to hear. The museum case was dimly lit, but the feathers still shimmered. Green, gold, iridescent, like sunlight trapped in motion. They were arranged in a headdress once worn by an elite Aztec warrior. And as I leaned closer, I saw something beyond the colors. I saw a story woven into every plume. A legacy of honor, sacrifice, and war. Not just for conquest, but for balance. The Aztec warrior was more than a soldier. He was a sacred actor in a cosmic play. Every battle he fought, every enemy he faced, was part of a ritual older than memory. War was not only about territory or pride. It was a dialogue with the gods, a way to feed the sun, a way to keep the world turning. At the heart of this warrior caste stood two sacred orders, the Eagle Warriors and the Jaguar Knights. They were not born into their roles, they earned them. Through courage, through capture, through the sacred act of taking enemies alive. Because for the Aztecs, a dead enemy was less valuable than a living one. A prisoner could be sacrificed. A prisoner could serve the gods. Eagle warriors wore wide-feathered helmets that framed their faces like the sun. They were the embodiment of Huitzilopochtli, the war god, fierce, proud, radiant. They fought in daylight, in open battle, their armor glinting with shells and mirrors, designed to blind and awe. They were the bringers of fire. Jaguar Knights, by contrast, moved in silence. They were the shadows. Cloaked in spotted pelts, masked with snarling maws, they prowled the battlefield like their totem. Swift, precise, relentless. They honored Tezcatlipoca, the smoking mirror, god of the night sky and destiny. One brought the sun, the other hunted in the dark. But make no mistake, these warriors were not brutes. They were trained from childhood in Calmekex and Telpocalis, schools where they learned the art of war, the history of their people, the movements of stars. They fasted, they endured pain, they memorized poems and prayers. Discipline was sacred, every strike was measured, every blow a message. Their weapons, too, carried this balance of beauty and brutality. The Makuahutel, a wooden sword lined with razor-sharp obsidian. It did not cut like metal. It shattered, tore, delivered pain with precision. Some say it could decapitate a horse in one blow. Yet even in its terror, it was art, crafted with care, used with purpose. And always, there was the ritual. Before battle, warriors painted their faces, offered prayers, burned copal. The battlefield was not chaos. It was choreography, a sacred drama in which life, death, and sacrifice moved together in rhythm. Even defeat could be holy, if it ended in offering. I once held a jaguar helmet in my hands, found half buried near the ruins of an old fortress, its snout chipped, its paint faded, and in that moment I could almost hear it, the pulse of drums, the cry of flutes, the roar of warriors charging into dawn with fire in their eyes. These were not nameless fighters. They were individuals shaped by vision, by devotion, by a belief that their blades upheld the cosmos, that every enemy taken was another sunrise secured it. And perhaps that is what separates them from the empires of our own time. They did not fight for greed alone. They fought to participate in creation itself. They were not merely tools of violence. They were guardians of the cycle, the shield, and the offering. The feathers may have dulled, The obsidian may have cracked, but the spirit of those warriors still lingers, in stone carvings, in ancient songs, and in the silent awe they still command. The pages were not made of paper. They were stretched deerskin, folded like an accordion, painted with colors that had not faded, reds like dried blood, blues like twilight, yellows like cornfields in harvest. It was one of the lucky few. A codex that survived the fire. When the Spanish came, they brought more than swords. They brought flames. To them, the Aztec codices were heresy, pagan lies, dangerous magic. So they gathered them by the hundreds, perhaps by the thousands, and cast them into the fire. Wisdom erased, histories turned to smoke, memories shattered in a single afternoon. But a few escaped. The Codex Borgia, the Codex Mendoza, the Florentine Codex, some hidden, some taken, some painstakingly copied by friars who saw something deeper. These were not just books, they were time machines, portals to a way of thinking that saw no division between art, science, and the sacred. Each codex was a universe. They did not use alphabets. They used glyphs, symbols, pictograms arranged in winding sequences like serpents across the page. They told stories of gods and emperors, of markets and marriage rituals, of eclipses and floods. Some were calendars. Others were manuals of medicine. Some were maps of the stars. To the Aztecs, writing was sacred. Tlaquilos, the scribes, were not just artists. They were priests, recorders of divine order. Every line they painted had to be correct, every color chosen with care. There was no room for error. Because the codex did not just reflect reality, it preserved balance. I once sat in a climate-controlled vault beneath a museum and turned the pages of a facsimile. Even then, wearing gloves and under watchful eyes, I felt reverence, as if I was not reading history, but listening to it. A whisper rising from beneath the paint, a voice too long ignored. What struck me most was the silence. So much had been lost, whole volumes gone. Knowledge we cannot recover, how they viewed the cosmos, how they healed the sick, how they counted time in cycles far more complex than our linear years. And in the absence of those voices, we have filled the silence with guesses, with fragments. But the ones that remain speak with force. The Codex Borgia, for example, is a masterpiece of cosmology. It depicts gods of the underworld, rituals of sacrifice, and the calendar wheels that turned with celestial rhythm. The Florentine Codex, written by the Nahua people under the guidance of a Spanish friar, is a window into their daily lives, told in their own words, side by side with translations. It is a document of survival. And through it all, you sense the rhythm, the cycles of day and night, life and death, planting and harvest, war and peace. Time for the Aztecs was not a straight line. It was a circle, and the codices followed those curves like rivers etched in paint. Even now, scholars argue over meanings. Was that glyph a comet or a god? Was this page a prophecy or a memory? But maybe that is the beauty of it. These books were not made to be dissected. They were made to be lived with, spoken aloud, sung. I think of the fires that tried to erase them, of the hands that painted them in candlelight, of the voices that passed their meanings from elder to child long after the ink had dried. And I realized something simple. The codices did not survive by accident. They survived because someone chose to save them, to hide them, to carry them across oceans, to read them again. And in doing so, they passed the torch from one world to another, from fire to memory. It was not just a stone, it was a world. The Sunstone, as we call it now, lay buried for centuries beneath the streets of Mexico City. When it was unearthed in the late 19th century, it stunned the world, not just for its size, more than 12 feet wide and weighing over 20 tons, but for its meaning. A calendar, yes. But more than that, a cosmic map, a prophecy carved in basalt. At its center, a face peers out with wide eyes and a tongue shaped like a sacrificial blade. This is Tenochtitlán, the sun god, and he is not smiling. His gaze is stern, demanding, surrounded by symbols that speak of destruction, creation, and the endless turning of time. The Aztecs believed the universe had been created and destroyed 4 times before. We live now, they said, in the 5th sun, the final cycle, the age of movement, and this age, like the ones before, will end not in peace, but in catastrophe. Each previous world had perished in elemental fury, the first in jaguars, the second in wind, the third in fire, the fourth in flood, and the 5th, this one, would end in earthquakes. But the stone was not merely a doomsday clock. It was also a calendar of astonishing complexity. The Aztecs used 2 main cycles: the Tonalpohualli, a sacred calendar of 260 days used for divination and rituals, and the Huitzilopochtli, a solar calendar of 365 days, marking the agricultural year. Together, they created a great cycle of 52 years, a sacred century. At the end of each 52-year cycle, panic set in, because no one knew if the gods would allow the world to continue. Fires were extinguished, temples were cleansed, people fasted, prayed, waited. And when the first new flame was lit at midnight atop a sacred hill, the world was reborn for another cycle, another chance. The calendar was not about prediction, it was about participation. The Aztecs did not wait for time to pass. They danced with it, negotiated with it, fed it with offerings, appeased it with sacrifice. To them, time was alive. It could be angered, it could be soothed. When I stood before the sunstone, I felt it. Not just the weight of the stone, but the weight of expectation, the sense that time is not linear, that it coils like a serpent biting its tail, that every ending carries the seed of a beginning, and that we too are caught in its loop. Some believe the Aztecs predicted the end of the world, that their calendar pointed to a date and declared a final breath. But that is not what the stone says. It does not give an exact moment, it gives a pattern, a warning, a truth we would rather ignore. That all things end, that all structures fall, that the sky, which gives light, can also bring fire. And yet, it also reminds us that nothing truly vanishes, that after every collapse there is rebuilding, after every night a dawn. The sunstone is not a tombstone, it is a wheel, turning, always turning. I touched its surface once, cold, rough, ancient, and I wondered how many others had touched it before me. How many had looked up at the sky and wondered, is this the end, or is it only the beginning again? The wind was sharp at the top. It whispered around the corners of broken stone and fluted columns, carrying with it the scent of dust, sage, and something older. I stood atop the Templo Mayor, or what remains of it, and looked down at the place where rivers of blood once flowed. This was not myth, not metaphor. It was real, Here, at the heart of Tenochtitlan stood the twin pyramids that crowned the empire, one dedicated to Tlaloc, god of rain, the other to Huitzilopochtli, god of sun and war, and between them the altar, a slab of stone, cold, still, but once soaked in the heat of countless lives. The Aztecs believed the universe demanded payment. The sun must be fed. The rain must be earned. Life could not be taken for granted. It had to be purchased, again and again, with something more valuable than gold, with blood. Sacrifice was not a punishment. It was a privilege, a sacred exchange. And the victims were not always enemies. Some were chosen, some were volunteers. Some were raised from birth to die upon that altar, praised, prepared, purified, not with fear, but with ceremony. The rituals were complex. The priests, cloaked in obsidian and feathers, ascended the pyramid with chants and incense. The beating of drums echoed like a heartbeat across the city. And when the moment came, the heart was lifted skyward, still warm, still pulsing, as an offering to the gods. To us it may seem cruel, barbaric, but to the Aztecs it was balance, a return. The heart, they believed, was the seat of the soul, and the gods, who had bled themselves to create the world, now received that gift in return. Gold, contrary to the stories spread by the conquerors, was not their obsession. It was sacred, yes, but it was not the currency of faith. Blood was, and the pyramid was its altar. Still, gold found its place. When the Spanish arrived, they marveled at the size of the temple. They spoke of gold-covered walls, turquoise mosaics, and statues so lifelike they seemed to breathe. They did not understand the meaning behind the sacrifice. They only saw wealth, and they wanted it. But the Aztecs saw something else. They saw continuity. In the rising of the pyramid, they mirrored the sacred mountain. In the rituals atop it, they mirrored the ancient gods. The architecture was theology in stone. Every step, every carving, every drop, part of a larger rhythm. I ran my hand along one of the stones. It was worn smooth by time, but I imagined it slick once, hot beneath the sun, humming with the energy of ritual, the sounds of chanting, the scent of burning copal, the sight of thousands gathered below, their faces painted, their eyes lifted. And I wondered, what was it like to believe so deeply in something that you would give your life to uphold it? Not from fear, but from faith. What would it take to build a society that revolved around the idea that every heartbeat mattered, because it could be the last? The Templo Mayor is quiet now. Its foundations lie beneath modern streets, glass towers rising where once the gods were fed. But the memory clings to the stones. The scent of copal returns with the rain. And the stories, they still rise. Another life, another offering, another step in the climb. The figure was small, maybe 4 inches high, carved from clay. A man with a beard, wearing strange clothes, standing stiff with arms at his sides. But it was the eyes that caught me, wide, unblinking, as if even now it was watching. This was not a European trinket brought by conquest. It was older, found in the valley, buried beneath Aztec ruins, a stranger captured in clay long before the Spaniards ever set foot on these shores. Some call it a coincidence, others a mistake. But in hushed corners of study, there are whispers of something more, that the Aztecs expected the arrival of foreigners, that they were waiting for a god, and instead, met men in iron. Hernan Cortés stepped onto the Gulf Coast in the year 1519. To the Aztecs, it was the year 1 Reed, a sacred year in their calendar, long foretold as the time of return, the return of Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent god, a bringer of light, a god with pale skin and a beard who had once departed to the east and was destined to return from the same direction. The timing was uncanny. The first reports that reached Tenochtitlán described ships like mountains floating on the sea, beasts with hooves, men wrapped in metal, thunder that came from sticks. To the Aztecs, it was not invasion. Not yet. It was wonder, confusion, perhaps prophecy. Moctezuma, the emperor, did not act with haste. He sent gifts. He watched, he waited, and slowly the Spaniards made their way inland, cutting deals, gathering allies, unraveling fear into opportunity. But who was Cortés? Really? He was not a god. He was a man driven by ambition, exile, and desperation. Yet he played his part well. He accepted the offerings, allowed the rumors to grow, walked into the empire not with armies, but with performance. Every gesture, every word fed the illusion. Some say Moctezuma believed he was facing a deity. Others say he saw through it, but chose diplomacy to avoid war. Either way, the meeting of these two worlds was not the clash of equals. It was a collision of meanings. The Aztecs saw cosmic return. The Spanish saw conquest. Iron met obsidian. Gunpowder met faith. And beneath it all, disease began to whisper. Smallpox moved faster than any soldier. Invisible, unstoppable, the true stranger wearing no armor at all. But before the battles, before the betrayal, before the fall, there was a moment, a pause in the turning wheel, when Moctezuma stood before Cortés, emperor before exile, priest before pirate, and the city held its breath. I think often of that first encounter. The Aztecs saw the Spaniards as something other, not just foreign, but impossible, and perhaps the Spaniards saw the Aztecs the same way, both staring into a mirror and seeing a future neither could predict. The clay figure remains on my desk, a quiet witness. Its edges worn, its meaning unclear, but I keep it there as a reminder that history does not always speak in loud voices. Sometimes it speaks in fragments, in symbols, in quiet shapes buried in the earth. Sometimes it speaks of strangers and the silence before the storm. It was black, smooth, and silent. A disk of polished obsidian buried beneath the dust of centuries, found in a chamber once sealed beneath Chapultepec Hill. No inscriptions, no frame, just the dark shimmer of stone catching the light in ways that felt unnatural, like it remembered even when we had forgotten. They say Emperor Moctezuma looked into a mirror like this, that he saw not his face, but his fate. Obsidian was sacred to the Aztecs, not only as a weapon, but as a window. Mirrors carved from volcanic glass were not tools of vanity. They were instruments of vision, portals through which priests and rulers could glimpse other realms, the world of spirits, of ancestors, of the gods. To peer into an obsidian mirror was not to reflect, it was to receive. Images came like smoke, not clear but insistent. Fragments of what was or what could be. A warrior's death, a shifting alliance, a city in flames. And in that darkness, truth danced with prophecy. Moctezuma was no fool. He was a priest king, trained in astronomy, theology, and law, chosen by omens, maintained by ritual. He was the beating heart of an empire that did not separate the political from the spiritual. Every decision he made echoed through both worlds, so when the signs began to appear, he noticed. Comets streaked the sky, temples burned without cause, the lake churned with strange tides, and in his mirror, they say, Moctezuma saw ships, pale-faced men, iron weapons, towers falling, and he asked his priests again and again, what does it mean? The answers were never simple. Some urged war, others warned of doom, but Moctezuma hesitated. He sent envoys, he sent gifts. He studied the strangers from afar, and perhaps in his heart, he wondered if resistance was futile, if the gods themselves had called an end to the fifth sun. In that mirror, did he see his own death? Did he see the chains around his wrists, the rage of his people, the silence that would follow? Or did he see us, digging through ruins, holding fragments of his world in gloved hands, trying to understand what he could not escape? When Cortez arrived in Tenochtitlan, Moctezuma welcomed him, with honor, with ceremony, not as a conqueror, perhaps not even as a god, but as a question he had already asked and already answered. Some say he surrendered too easily, that he was weak, afraid, but I do not believe that. I believe he was listening to something we cannot hear, a rhythm behind time, a voice behind the veil. In the obsidian mirror, there are no certainties, only shadows, possibilities, echoes. And that is the tragedy and the wisdom. We want our leaders to be strong, decisive, clear, but Moctezuma lived in a world where clarity was rare and the gods demanded nuance. He ruled not just a city, but a cosmos, balanced on sacrifice, ritual, and cycles. And when that balance cracked, when the mirror darkened, he faced it alone. Today, the mirror sits behind glass, a relic, cold, still. But when the light hits it just right, something flickers. Not an image, not a prophecy, just a feeling. That someone once stood before it. A man, a ruler, a believer, and saw the end of his world in the shimmer of a stone. It began with gold, not with war cries or cannon fire, but with the quiet weight of greed. The Spaniards had been in Tenochtitlan for months, guests and prisoners all at once, holding Moctezuma in his own palace. They studied the city, mapped its bridges, watched the rituals, waited. And then they struck. During one of the great festivals, when thousands gathered to honor the gods, the Spaniards attacked. The drums were still beating when the swords began to fall. The temple steps ran red. The dancers, unarmed and painted for ceremony, were cut down. It was not a battle, it was a massacre. The people erupted in fury. Stones flew, fire spread. Moctezuma, once their sacred voice, now stood silent behind foreign guards. The spell had broken. The empire had seen its guests for what they truly were. The siege began. Barricaded in the palace, the Spaniards and their allies, including Tlaxcalan warriors, found themselves surrounded. Days passed in violence and confusion. Supplies ran low, hope slipped away. Moctezuma, still in their grasp, tried to calm his people. He stood on a rooftop, called out for peace. The stones came fast. He fell. Whether he was killed by his own people or by the Spaniards remains unclear. But when he died, something shifted. The spell broke completely, and the foreigners knew they could not hold the city any longer. They would have to flee. Under the cover of darkness, in the early hours of June the 30th, 1520, they slipped out. Heavy with stolen gold, armor clinking in the silence, they crossed one of the causeways that led out of Tenochtitlan. The night was thick with fog and fear, but the Aztecs were waiting. From canoes and rooftops, warriors struck, arrows rained down, spears flashed in torchlight. The causeway became a trap, slick with blood and panic. Many Spaniards fell into the lake, dragged down by the weight of their greed. Others were captured, sacrificed. Few escaped untouched. This was La Noche Triste, the Night of Sorrows. Cortez himself barely survived. He wept beneath a tree, so the story goes, mourning not just the dead, but the pride that had shattered. They had underestimated the city, underestimated the people, and now they paid the price. But victory for the Aztecs was brief. The disease had already spread. Smallpox, brought by one of Cortez's men, moved through the city like a silent fire. No prayers could stop it. No warriors could fight it. While the Spaniards regrouped, the empire weakened from within. The defenders of the city were now fighting not just soldiers, but something unseen, something merciless. Still, for one night, the world turned. The oppressors fled. The gods were honored, and the city stood tall. I visited the place where it happened, where the causeway once stretched across the water. Today, it is paved, loud with cars and footsteps. But if you stand still in the early morning, you can hear something beneath the noise. Not voices, not drums, just the quiet ache of memory. The gold taken that night was never recovered. It lies somewhere beneath the modern streets. But the real treasure of that night was resistance, defiance, a moment when a city rose up, not in victory, but in pride. The Night of Sorrows was not the end, but it was a turning, a shadow across the sun, and though the empire would fall, that night still burns, quiet, fierce, unforgotten. The lake no longer reflected the stars. It was choked with corpses, canoes shattered, bridges torn apart. The city once called the Venice of the New World had become a battlefield, no longer a place of floating gardens and feathered dancers, but a cage of hunger, smoke, and screams. The siege of Tenochtitlan had begun. After the Night of Sorrows, Cortez retreated, but not for long. He regrouped, rebuilt, and returned with more men, more guns, and crucially, more allies. Thousands of indigenous warriors, including the Tlaxcalans, joined his cause. They came not to serve Spain, but to see the Aztec Empire fall. Years of resentment now burned like dry grass. Cortez only had to spark it. He cut the city off. Day by day, they dismantled the causeways, blocked the canals, starved the people. What was once a lake-fed paradise became a trap. Fish and fresh water disappeared. Food ran out. The marketplaces fell silent. Even the gods, it seemed, turned their faces away. Inside the city, the people resisted, fiercely. They fought from rooftops, leapt into canoes, rebuilt what was destroyed overnight. Women carried water under fire. Children gathered stones. Every street became a trench, every temple a fortress. But it was not enough. Smallpox had already thinned their numbers. The disease had no rhythm, no rules. It struck priests and warriors alike. Bodies piled up in corners of temples that once smelled of incense. The sacred was now rotting. And the people, hungry, sick, surrounded, began to fall. I walked those streets once, or rather, what remains of them. Buried beneath the modern avenues, beneath the glass and steel, pieces of the siege still rest. Broken stairways, charred beams, a jawbone cracked and forgotten. All reminders that an empire does not fall cleanly. It falls in pieces. By the time the final assault came, the defenders had little left. Tenochtitlan had been gutted, its twin temples blackened, its canals turned to graveyards. The last emperor, Cuauhtémoc, fought with fire in his heart, young, brave, unyielding. He did not flee. He stood, even when the city crumbled around him. On August 13th, 1521, the siege ended. Cuauhtémoc was captured while trying to escape across the lake. He was brought before Cortés, defiant even in chains. "I have done what was my duty," he said. "Now take your dagger and finish me." But Cortés spared him for the moment. The city was taken, but it was not victory, it was ruin. The Spanish walked through streets thick with ash and silence. The temples were pulled down, the idols smashed, the libraries burned. From the bones of Tenochtitlan, a new city would rise, but it would not be the same. I once stood where the Templo Mayor had been, watching tourists take pictures beside the ruins. I thought of Cuauhtémoc, of the women who carried water, of the children who held stones, of the priests who sang their last prayers beneath falling stone. History does not always end with ceremony. Sometimes it ends in fire and forgetting, but even ashes remember. The siege was not just the fall of a city. It was the end of a way of seeing the world, a world where time moved in circles, where gods walked among men, where balance was worth bleeding for. That world did not vanish, it was buried. And now, slowly, we uncover it. The city is still there, not in the skyline, not in the traffic or towers, but beneath it. Beneath the pavement, the glass, the steel, beneath the hurried footsteps of millions who walk through Mexico City without knowing what lies under their feet. Tenochtitlan never vanished. It waits. I remember the sound of the trowel brushing against stone, a soft scrape, a sudden pause, then the glint of something green in the earth. Not gold, but jade. Cool, smooth, shaped like a tiny mask, its eyes blank, its mouth calm. Buried beside a temple wall for over 500 years, and now, blinking once more in the sunlight. The treasures of Tenochtitlan are not always grand, not always golden. They are intimate, personal, a figurine of a dancing woman, a child's toy made from fired clay, a bundle of turquoise beads buried with careful hands. These were offerings, not to kings or gods of conquest, but to the earth itself, to the lake, to the balance of things. Archaeologists working in the shadow of the Metropolitan Cathedral have found hundreds of such offerings. Beneath the cathedral's weight lies the old heart of the city, the Templo Mayor, still giving up its secrets piece by piece. A knife carved from obsidian, a skull covered in red cinnabar, a bowl shaped like a serpent filled with coral from distant seas. The Aztecs did not bury treasure for wealth, they buried it for meaning. Every item placed with purpose, a ritual, a prayer, a map for the gods. To dig here is not to loot the past, it is to listen to it. And sometimes, the past answers. In 2006, beneath a colonial house near the old ceremonial precinct, a monolith was discovered, 11 feet across, carved with the image of Tenochtitlan, the earth goddess. She sprawled with jaws open, claws extended, swallowing the world and giving it birth at once. Buried face up beneath layers of stone, a message meant not for the living but for the divine. Gold has been found too, but not in the ways we expect. Not hidden in vaults or heaped in chests. Often it comes as fragments, sheets pressed into thin patterns. Masks too delicate to wear, rings so small they seem made for dolls, treasures not for display but for ceremony. And then there are the more mysterious finds. Bones arranged in perfect circles, columns of skulls once mounted on racks, tiny frogs made of jade placed beside eagle feathers and obsidian blades. These were not ornaments, they were cosmology, symbols of rain, rebirth, sacrifice, a language written in silence and buried in the earth. I once held a small piece of gold shaped like a sun disk. It fit in my palm, light as a feather. But when I turned it in the light, I felt the weight of generations. Not just what it was made of, but what it meant. A world where treasure had purpose beyond possession, where value was measured in memory. Every time we unearth another piece, we are reminded of what the Spanish could not take, the soul of the city, the layers of faith, myth, and intention still sleeping beneath the surface. Tenochtitlán's riches were never meant to be displayed in palaces. They were meant to speak, to gods, to ancestors, and now to us. Not all treasure shines, some whispers. The empire fell, the temples burned, the gods were buried, their names banned from prayer, and their faces shattered in stone. And yet, the people remained. The survivors of Tenochtitlán did not vanish. They walked the same streets, now paved with foreign stones. They drank from the same lake, though it no longer reflected the sky. They whispered in a language the conquerors could not kill. They remembered. But they did so quietly. In the years that followed the conquest, silence became survival. The Spanish demanded conversion. Temples were replaced with churches, altars with crosses. The sacred drums were hushed, the old dances forbidden. The Nahua people, once the rulers of a vast empire, were now labeled as subjects, and the stories they told were no longer theirs to share. But silence, too, is a language. It lingers in lullabies passed from mother to child, in the way corn is ground each morning, in the rhythm of feet tracing the old dances in secret, in the words still spoken. Nahuatl, the tongue of the Mexica, is not extinct. It breathes in markets, in village squares, in the quiet prayers before sunrise. The Spaniards wrote the official histories, but the Nahua elders taught their own, hidden in the margins, etched in the bones of memory. Some friars listened. A few, like Bernardino de Sahagun, recorded what they could. The Florentine Codex, written with the help of Nahua scribes, captured fragments of the old world, its medicines, its myths, its mathematics. But even then, the telling was filtered, framed through Christian eyes. The gods became demons. The ceremonies became superstition. Truth was bent. And still, the people adapted. They painted saints with the colors once used for Huitzilopochtli. They placed crosses where the sun would rise. They reimagined their gods inside the new faith, giving them Spanish names, but not forgetting who they had been. Even under forced baptism, the memory of Tenochtitlán burned low, like coals under ash. I visited a small village once far from the city. During a local festival, children wore masks shaped like jaguars. They danced to the beat of a Huitl drum, their bare feet pounding the earth in rhythms older than the church beside them. No one said the word Aztec. No one spoke of empire. But the past was there, in every movement, every sound. This was not rebellion, it was remembrance. Because when you lose everything, your city, your leaders, your gods, All that remains is memory and the will to carry it forward, not in defiance, but in quiet persistence. Some stories survive by shouting, others by waiting. The descendants of the Mexica walk among us still. They carry both the burden and the pride of their ancestors. They are teachers, artists, farmers. They speak in 2 languages, sometimes 3. One for the world, one for the self, and one for the gods who still listen. The silence of the survivors was not emptiness. It was preservation, a shield, a seed. And now, centuries later, we begin to hear them again. Not in textbooks, not in monuments, but in song, in ceremony, in the reclaiming of names once buried. The survivors did not forget. They watched the world change, and they kept the flame low, steady, enduring. It happened on a quiet afternoon. In a village just outside the bounds of modern Mexico City, I heard it, a drumbeat echoing across the plaza, steady and deep. Then came the voice, low and rhythmic, chanting syllables I did not understand, yet somehow recognized. A language older than the church that stood nearby, older than the flag that fluttered above the town square. It was Nahuatl, rising like mist through the cracks of time. And then the dancers appeared, feathers in their hair, shells tied to their ankles, obsidian mirrors on their chests. They moved not for tourists, not for spectacle, but for memory. Each step marked the rhythm of survival. Each spin mirrored the turning of the sun. I had come looking for ruins. Instead, I found something alive. This was not a reenactment, it was a return. Across Mexico, across the Americas, the cultural roots of the Aztecs are rising again, not as an empire, but as a presence, a force, in murals and music, in language schools and traditional medicine, in the quiet confidence of people who know where they come from, even if the world once told them to forget. The stones are speaking again. In downtown Mexico City, beneath layers of concrete and colonial ambition, the ruins of the Templo Mayor continue to reveal themselves. Each excavation brings new offerings to light: jade masks, eagle bones, flutes shaped like serpents. But more than that, they bring attention. Visitors lean close to glass cases, reading the names, listening to the guides speak of gods once forbidden. Even the calendar has returned. The Aztec Tonalpohualli, the sacred cycle of 260 days, is studied once more, practiced, used to mark births and ceremonies. Young people wear glyphs of their day signs around their necks, reclaiming identities denied to their ancestors. The cycles, once interrupted, are spinning again. In schools, Nahuatl classes are filling with students, not just scholars, but children of the land, eager to speak in the voice of their great-grandparents. The language that carried the empire across valleys and mountaintops now finds new breath in classrooms, in poetry, in song. Artisans carve with obsidian. Weavers dye cloth with ancient pigments. Musicians play flutes carved from bone. Each act is a restoration, a conversation with the past, not to recreate what was lost, but to continue what was never fully broken. This is not nostalgia. It is not a longing for empire or conquest. It is something deeper, a reminder that culture is not a ruin to be studied. It is a living thing. It adapts, it flows. I once watched a boy no more than 10 perform a dance in a feathered headdress. His movements were focused, his face calm. When he finished, he looked up at the sky, not seeking approval, but connection. as if the sun itself was watching, as if the gods had never left. And maybe they haven't. Maybe they're in the drum beats, in the painted faces, in the laughter of elders teaching Nahuatl phrases to grandchildren beneath the shadow of a church. Maybe rebirth does not require fire and thunder. Maybe it comes quietly, in stone and song. Tenochtitlan may be buried, but the spirit that built it walks on. It was in a museum. A quiet hall filled with relics and glass, the kind of place where voices drop to whispers and footsteps echo like distant drums. I stood before a display case, staring into the polished surface of a shield. Obsidian inlaid with gold, still gleaming after centuries. And for a moment, I did not see the artifact. I saw a reflection. My own face, but not alone. Behind the glass, layered with time and shadow, I saw something else. Not the past, not the present, something in between. A reminder that we are not just observers of history, we are part of it. The Aztec Empire may have fallen, its cities destroyed, its temples torn down, but its vision remains. A worldview that measured time in circles, not lines. That placed humans not above nature, but within it. That believed the sun must be fed, not with conquest, but with ceremony, with devotion, with balance. We look at the Aztecs and see warriors, pyramids, sacrifice. But that is not the whole story. There was poetry, astronomy, law, gardens floating on water, music that called down the rain, calendars more accurate than the ones we use today, stories passed from heart to heart, not just mouth to ear. They built an empire on lakes and symbols, on stone and stars, on memory and myth, and like all empires, it broke, not only from swords and sickness, but from within, from the weight of belief carried too far, from cycles that turned too quickly, from gods that demanded more than any people could give. But even as it fell, it left something behind. Not ruins, but echoes. The sound of Nahuatl still spoken in homes and schools, the shape of old glyphs carved into modern murals, the rhythm of the drum beneath the beat of city streets, the feathered headdress worn not as costume but as crown, as continuation. In that reflection, I saw more than history. I saw the question the Aztecs asked with every offering, every dance, every carved stone. How do we live in balance? It is a question we still ask, in our cities, in our rituals, in the quiet moments when we wonder where we come from and where we are going. The mirror does not give answers. It shows what we carry: pride, power, faith, loss, the will to create, the fear of endings, the hope of rebirth. I think often of the eagle on the cactus, the one that led the Mexica to their island in the lake. It was a vision then. It is a flag now. But maybe it is something more, a reminder that from the unlikely, the extraordinary can rise. Tenochtitlan was not meant to exist, and yet it did. It defied nature, defied enemies, defied time. And though its stones have fallen, its meaning remains. We are all in some way standing before that mirror, part of the same story, looking for signs, listening for memory, searching the face of the past for something we recognize in ourselves. Because history does not stay buried, it waits. And when we are ready, it speaks. The dust has settled now. The last page of the Codex turned, the last stone touched. And still, the presence of the Aztec world lingers. in the silence between footsteps, in the warmth of sun on worn stone, in the breath we hold when we speak their name. Tenochtitlán, not a ruin, but a rhythm. We began this journey with a question: how could an empire rise from a lake and vanish within a generation? But as we walked deeper into temples, mirrors, gardens, and blood, we found the answer was never just one thing. It was belief, it was ritual, it was pain and poetry wound tightly together. The Aztecs did not see themselves as separate from the world. They were participants in its pulse. They lived in service to a cosmos that demanded courage, vision, and sacrifice. What they built was more than a city. It was a statement that the world could be ordered, that life could be honored, that even in the face of destruction, meaning could endure. And when it all fell, when the last emperor was dragged from his canoe and the last altar torn down, what remained was not silence, but song. Soft at first, hidden, but still present, still growing. We have walked through their rise, traced their fall, and listened for the heartbeat that continues beneath centuries of forgetting. And what we find is not just history, it is reflection. Because the Aztecs are not only in the past, they are in us, in the way we tell stories, in how we search for order in the stars, in how we build and break and build again. Their empire may have ended, but their vision never did. Another piece of the puzzle, another secret swallowed by the ages. But I have learned one thing on this path. History does not whisper, it waits. And when we listen, truly listen, it has so much more to give. Thank you for walking this journey with me. The expedition continues, always.